Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. And joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this today, now the 124th day of the war and 124th day of the hostages in captivity. We are praying for their release and praying for their well-being, knowing that every single day that goes by is another day of torture and terror for them, praying for Klal Yisrael, for Am Yisrael, for Medinat Yisrael, that we experience better days and Besorot Tovot ahead of us, and that the study of Torah, which we are engaged in on a weekly basis through the study of the Parsha, will bring us a measure of comfort and anchor our lives the way that that we hope it does for everybody who's been watching and listening. And this week is Parashat Mishpatim. Mishpatim is a parsha that comes, obviously right after the Aseret Dibrot, the Parshat Yitro, which is the Ten Commandments. It's that scene, almost can't get it out of our imagination. We were standing at Sinai just a week ago. Last week, we were standing at Sinai listening and terrified by the volcanic eruption of Sinai and the need to kind of step back from Sinai. And now we're getting Mishpatim. We're getting a whole set of laws. Ve'ela hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. Here are the laws that you shall place before them. And what we have several chapters of law. So immediately I want to explore the feeling that we get in these words now. We're listening. I want to transport myself to Sinai and imagine listening to this. Imagine that I've just experienced, the Ten Commandments and all the tremendous phenomena around it. And now we have rules, a whole set of rules, lots and lots of rules. It's a change of mode. It's like a new movement in the symphony. And I'm wondering if either of you have a relationship to this in that way, that you feel that the car has moved into moved into second gear or third gear, and that we're now in a different genre, certainly different movement, and we're now experiencing Torah in a different way. And what is the meaning of that experience? And take it anywhere you want to go, even if you want, if you want to start with the first Rashi on this. I'm puzzled by how things shift here, and whether you could talk to that or not.
So what I would say is your puzzlement is genuine, already sensed by the rabbis, but eventually they dismiss it because it's not real. So Rashi's comment is Kol makom shenemar eila pasal et harishonim. Every place where the Torah says eila something, it means whatever came before is invalidated. The va'ela mosif ala rishonim, but va'ela, which we have in our parsha, and these adds to what came before. And this is a critical piece. Ma harishonim misinai af elu misinai. Just as the first things are from Sinai, so too is this. And it leads us to reconsider that short first verse which you read, Elliot, because the Mishpatim are going to be delivered by Moshe. There's some kind of confusion in the Torah, depending on how we understand the last verse of chapter 19, as to who actually says the Ten Commandments. One can make the argument that it's God, because it begins on Anochi, or that it's actually Moshe who came down the mountain to relate what God told him. But here the key is that Moshe is giving the Mishpatim. And we, standing in for all of Bnei Israel, have to recognize that Torah comes not just from God himself, but also through Moshe. And that is of critical importance because we could think we're so caught up last week in the revelation at Mount Sinai that we forget about the details that are necessary to make the Sinai experience live again and again and again throughout our lives.
Sure.
Quite beautiful, quite beautiful. Because we know that obviously this is a religion that values, the human study and the human exposition. So that really resonates to me what you just said. To me, I do think it is an abrupt change. We have had a couple of mitzvot before. We had the mitzvot of Pesach and a couple of mitzvot. Aside from the Ten Commandments, but there's a couple of ritual mitzvot in Bishalach and the end of Yitro. But to me, the abrupt shift here, very, very, very central to Judaism, is that this is going to be a religion where civil law, business law, interpersonal, system of obligations that what we have towards one another, this is very, very central to this religion. It's not like, okay, religion is really about worship, it's about mystery, it's about theological points. We've had this tremendous experience at Har Sinai, and the first thing we say is, okay, listen, here's the deal. Some of you are going to be really poor. Some of you are going to have to sell yourselves into slavery to pay your debts. Here are the limitations of that system. Here's how to make that system non-exploitative. Here's what's going to happen if you get in a fight, somebody strikes somebody else, and how do you pay the 5 categories of damage that are true of rabbinic torts. This is a human scale religion about creating a society where people will treat each other appropriately, and that is of religious concern.
So I'm very curious as we're talking about this, thinking, what's the experience of the listener? What's the experience of listening to this? And if this is construed as a piece of oratory or speech, okay, it would make for a very different kind of speech. After all, in oratory, there are all sorts of conventions. There's poetry, and there's story, and there's trying to create a point, trying to communicate a point. You think about all the great pieces of oratory that we might be familiar with, and that we ourselves, of course, engage in from time to time, and this has a certain effect on the audience. And one possible effect is, what are you telling me? And another possible effect could be, this is interesting. We've just had this experience, and now he's putting me into an environment where there's a possibility for I might own a slave. There's a possibility that we will be in a unit, in a community where people will fight. And people will engage in also they will damage each other. They will damage each other's property. They will damage each other's animals. And so the list of laws is unfolding here, and I'm getting a picture of each law, and it's too much for me. And I know that the rabbis will tell me, well, you got to go back and you got to study, and of course we have a whole library on each one of them. But I'm wondering if you have a reaction to this, as literature, and if you have a reaction to this in terms of emotion, or what is the intended reaction response to this?
So all great questions. I think that I would like to see this as a song, that this is music. And at Mount Sinai, at the revelation, there is a sound of the shofar, the accompaniment of the orchestra, so to speak. And we've had the main theme played out in the 10 Commandments, and this is kind of the coda. And so while I'm listening, the details may be difficult to absorb, but as I'm listening, I'm thinking to myself, there's nothing here that I can't do. The only thing that would prevent me from doing any of these laws would be circumstance, not impossibility. And therefore, I'm thinking that this all makes sense. I might not know all the details, but there's certainly enough here to go back and find out. but I can do this, and this is what's going to let me take Sinai into the land, because the mountain is not going to move. But I could take the event, both the revelation from last week and the list of laws this week, and travel with them and create a society where God will be present.
I like the idea that you mentioned of music. I actually want to say it probably was literally music, in the sense that music, chant or melody, uh, was a medium for memorizing large bodies of text and transmitting these texts. I don't know what the emotion would have been. Of course, that is lost to us, but historians of music will tell us that large bodies of literature were set to music or set to chant, or became part of culture, part of memory, because of their musical, they were sung. The law was sung, and of course, you could say the fact that we have the Masoretic chant to it, that the Torah chant that we all know and love on a weekly basis, that I think lends another level of memorization to this, and a level of interaction to it. And you're saying that there is a theme to this that emerges. I don't know if, Jeremy, you have what's your emotional response to it? What comes out at you?
Well, first of all, the musical thing reminds me of a verse in Psalm 119. Zemirot hayu li chukecha be'eretz megurai.
Nice,
Your
nice.
your
Translate.
your laws were songs to me in all of my wanderings, and of course in Hebrew poetry and song is the same, right? So it is poetic. I like what Barry said about the fundamental doability, as Moshe will later tell the people at the end of his life. It's not up in heaven. You don't have to be superhuman to do this. This is human. Like I said a few minutes ago, this is human scale religion. So I think my emotion, I mean, on one level, it's it's a little daunting. Here's what happens when there's a fist fight. Here's what happens when somebody's going to steal something. Here's what happens. There's other kinds of violations, and so it's like it moves from this. Um, the Ten Commandments perhaps moves from this amazingly affirmative image of God and humanity meeting, and then, by the way, stuff's going to get real in a little while, and you're not always going to like it, but here's how you're going to have to respond to it. But it to me, at least partly affirmative, even though some of the circumstances described in the laws are themselves unhappy. Um, to be God's covenantal partner in making that society, as Barry was saying, is like a big, gigantic vote of confidence. You are up to this. You are adequate to this. You are morally adequate to live in a society that knows how to handle poverty and wealth. You are morally adequate to live in a society that knows how to handle, violence and injury. That's just a gigantic vote of confidence. And the Deuteronomy will say, we'll look forward to a time when other nations will look at us and say, this is your great. What culture has such wise laws? This chokhmatchem ubinatchem le'nei ha'amim. It will cause other people to say, "Wow, Judaism is wise and just and fair." And of course there'll be individual rules that, from the perspective of 2024, will surprise us or be jarring or disturb us. That's fine, but to me, the emotional content of this covenant code is, okay. You ready? You ready? We're going to do this now. This is addressed to you in the adequacy of your moral capabilities.
So, and they're communicating something about God here. That may be in some specific commandments, but maybe in general. Because I was sharing with you before we started recording that preparing, I was listening to. I like listening to a particular reader reading this in Hebrew, Omer Frankel, on the 929.org website, that 929 group, which is wonderful, wonderful way of studying a chapter of Torah a day. And he's a wonderful reader, and the experience of listening to the text as opposed to reading the text affected me in a way that I had this experience of, well, I'm not able to grasp every single word right now, and I might be at some point the kid in your classroom who's like raising his hand, but what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? And now instead of having those specific experiences, I'm hearing there's God is there. There's something godly there, especially, and I'm going to give you an example. Turn to chapter 22, and we've talked about these texts before. 22, turn to chapter 22, verse 20, okay? Chapter 22, onat varim, ornat mamon, ger lo tone, ornat varim, sorry, harming someone, damaging someone with words or with, just by damaging them. Beger lo toneh, you shall not abuse the stranger. Velo tilchatzenu, do not oppress him. Ki gerim heyetem be'eretz Yisrael. So my law is telling me, because you were strangers in Egypt, don't abuse the stranger. Kol almanavi atom lo tanu. You can't oppress widows and orphans. Imaneta, but if you do, imaneta neoto, ki imtsaok yitzak elai, and they scream to me, Shamoa eshma tzakato, I will hear them. I will hear them. V'charapi, I'll get angry. V'arakti etchem b'charev, I'll kill them. V'yunashechem almanot v'nechem yitomim, and your wives will be widows, and your children will be orphans. That's a lot. That's very harsh, okay, admittedly. But there's a voice here that's saying, I'm attentive. I'm attentive to people's pain. I'm attentive to people's suffering. I'm attentive to people's feeling of abuse. And
to reinforce that,
yeah,
which I think is a great, great observation. And note how in 22 you have the three, it's the infinitive absolute verbs, right? Im aneta aneoto, it's the verb is doubled. It would be something like, if you oppress them at all. Ki im tsaoki tsakelai, if they shout to me at all, shamoa eshma, I will really hear. Like the doubled verbs, you have in that one sentence, three pairs of doubled verbs for intensification. You really get this attentive, caring God who is demanding. And people, the long history of Christian anti-Judaism, this is a religion of law, whereas we Christians are a religion of love. And the quote unquote Old Testament God is always so angry, and Jesus is always full of love. If you want a God who also cares about justice, you're going to have rules and standards. And this is a great example of how God is demanding of us exemplary ethical and social behavior.
So what I would add here is it's important to recognize the word that's used to describe the Israelites. They're supposed to remember that they were gerim in Egypt, that they were sojourners, not permanent dwellers in Egypt. One might have thought it should say you should remember that you were slaves. But slavery, despite the introductory laws of the Parsha, are not really part of the core experience of the Israelites when they're in their own land. What is important for them to recognize is that their continued presence in the land, their ability to be toshavim, settlers, as opposed to gerim, is going to depend on their ability to fulfill and follow these laws. Because if they're not, then they will be no better than they were in Egypt. They will, in fact, become sojourners in their land, which is an impossibility.
So I'm reacting also to Shamoa Eshma Tzakato, which is it's at the core of the religious experience. At the core of the religious experience is I want to be heard. I can't tell you how many times, I've had the conversation with a congregant who's in a terrible, state of pain and loss, and they're emotional, and they feel like abandoned. They feel that they're not heard. And I think that experience of not being heard really goes to the core of what it means to be a human. We want to be heard, and God is here saying, I'm going to hear you. If you're in pain, I'm going to hear you. If the most vulnerable in your community scream to me, I will listen to them. And that's a promise. And that promise, we want to hold God to that promise, which is part of where the great tension in religious life is. I don't know if you
Another verse that fits it in from Psalm 34. Ze ani kara v'Adonai shamea. This poor person cries out, and God hears. It is a distinctly important part of this religion that the most humble are the ones who get the most attention, or at least get a ton of attention. In I guess what parsha for what? Oh, there's the story of Solomon and the two women fighting over the baby is a haftarah that almost never gets read. It's the haftarah from the States, but it almost never gets read because Hanukkah will typically interrupt it. And this year we read it, and I we did it in my parsha class, and one of the things that was really special about that passage is that nobody remembers. I also didn't remember this, that the two women are described as zonot. They are prostitutes, or at a minimum,
sex workers.
They could be sex workers, or at a minimum, they could simply be, out of wedlock or whatever.
Okay.
And Solomon's greatness is portrayed that they have access to him. His wisdom is portrayed that the lowliest, probably most despised people have access to the king. And I think that story exemplifies this point that we're making now, that the God of Israel is attentive to the suffering of the most humble.
Okay, so let's go fast forward to the end of the parsha, where they do have a ceremony, and it's a covenantal ceremony. Vayavo Moshe, chapter 24, verse 3, Vayisaper la'am et kol divrei Adonai. He tells all of the things that God has said to the people, that kol mishpatim, and all the statutes. Vayan kol am kol echad. They all answer in one voice. Vayomru kol advarim asher diber Adonai na'aseh. We're going to do this. So this is a ratification ceremony. There's I think we all appreciate drama in life, and certain beautiful staging, a story and a ceremony. We've certainly constructed ceremonies of all sorts in our professional lives, and this is really at the core a ceremony, and they're doing it. They're doing a great job.
Don't skip the best part.
Okay, go. You read. Go ahead.
Okay, I will. So back to in the midst of verse 4. Early in the morning, he sets up the altar at the foot of the mountain with the 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel, and he designates some young men among the Israelites, and they offer the burnt offerings, and they sacrifice bulls as well as offerings of well-being to the Lord. And Moses took one part of the blood and put it in the basin, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. And then he took the record of the covenant and raised it aloud to the people, and the people will say, Na'aseh v'nishma, all that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do. And then Moses takes the blood and splashes it on the people and says, this is the blood of the covenant that Hashem now makes with you concerning all of these commandments. So it's the blood of the covenant, it's Dam Brit. So it's its own symbolic circumcision, so to speak. And he splashes the blood over all the people. Now that's dramatic.
That's dramatic. And I think that's, we tend to read the Na'aseh v'nishma as the climax of the whole story. But
it's the blood.
It's the blood. The blood is, and I guess because we're so squeamish, we don't want to focus on that. But I mean, everything kind of rises up to that moment.
It's really true that obviously it seems kind of gross to us. We don't have a religion any longer in which killing of animals and spilling the blood on the altar is the central religious act, or is a very central religious act, as biblical religion is. But there is just no mistaking. this is not a metaphor, guys. This is flesh and blood, and I mean this both about the, as we were saying, the kind of human scale quality to laws of wealth and poverty and violence and injury, but also the way it is enacted is with the shared blood. And you have got to imagine that if the people were all touched by blood together, that they felt blood brothers.
Right. We felt icky by it. Okay. This would gross us out.
They didn't know any better.
And they didn't know any better, or maybe they did, or maybe they were simply terrified. And that emotional response is, the mystical response. You're coming into contact with the substance that defines the boundary between life and death. And as you mentioned it, I was thinking in so many different rituals, and of course, in a few weeks we'll get to Vayikra, and what is Vayikra without pouring blood on an altar, sprinkling God, and consecrating with blood, etc., etc. And blood having this index role, that is to say, I'm designating something, I'm marking something because my ritual act is to designate us as the covenantal consecrated partner, and I don't have another medium for that. I mean, I don't have a magic wand, and I don't have Tinkerbell's magic dust, fairy dust, or whatever. I have a substance that is literally life and death. I have to take life in order to get that substance, which is terrifying. And that's the point, I guess. Okay, talk
Yeah.
about Seven Ishma, and how these two words really become defining of a certain kind of commitment, um, and perhaps defining of the enterprise of study or action, or the balance of study and action, and how they play out in our lives.
So I'd like to draw your attention to the verses that you read, Elliot. So the late Bible scholar Jacob Milgram liked to look for chiastic structures, X's, that would bind passages together. So in the verse that you read earlier, by Saper la'am et kol divrei Adonai v'et kol mishpatim. So this means that Moses tells them the revelation, those are the Devarim, and the Mishpatim is our Parsha Mishpatim. And then when we get to the end of this passage, Vayomu kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma. So the people respond, na'aseh, we will do the mishpatim, because nishma, we have heard the word.
Yeah.
And I think that what it does is it binds the revelation and the laws very nicely together, both for Moshe and for Bnei Yisrael. And that maybe is what explains part of the significance of the blood, which Moses is spilling on the people, which also connects them.
Fascinating. So we're left here with a large palette of different kinds of emotional responses. I think the emotional response of the law, which is this is what God wants of us, or this is what this religion is demanding from us, to live in the day-to-day details of complicated lives, community lives, lives of relationships, where people are going to get hurt and people are going to mess up, to live, with power, to live with the possibility of abusing that power, to live with all sorts of different dimensions, and to live with an attentive God who will respond in some way, and to live with mystery also. This mystery of being bound to God in ways that here we are thousands of years later, after these events took place, we're still talking about it. It's still part of our life, still part of the mystery of our lives, and still something that we love deeply, and that we want to uncover deeply, I guess.
Yeah, there are, religions that are, and we have it too. We certainly have mystical traditions, but there are religions, you say the mystery of our lives. And there are religions that like their wheelhouse is really the other realm. And and Judaism's wheelhouse is this realm. It's not that we don't have those other things and the traditions of Kabbalah and things that we think about the soul and philosophical ideas, that we have those things too. But our wheelhouse is the law. There's the last Mishnah in Tractate Baba Batra, I think it's the end of the three tractates on torts, is how Rotzeh Sheyachkim Ya'asok B'dinei Mamonot. Somebody who wants to be wise should study business law, because if the rubber hits the road, my ox is gonna gore your cow. I'm gonna do a poor job of building the corral, and your sheep's gonna get out, and I'm gonna owe you I'm gonna owe your sheep, and this religion has mysterious elements too, and some very unmysterious ones. There's a kind of basic secularity to some of this religion. I mean, it's got other stuff too. It's not just this, but there's a kind of, and so for people who, as I'm sure we know, lots of people who are, more into practical stuff than God talk. I mean, I'm into God talk, but if you're not into God talk, you can still care an awful lot about Parshat Mishpatim.
I agree with you.
So what I would add to what you said, Jeremy, is this idea that makes us human is not our capacity to damage, which we share with animals, but our capacity to repair the world.
Nice.
And that's what Mishpatim is about. The way that you described it, tort law is about repairing damage. And that's what makes us human.
That's beautiful.
It's
I'm gonna
beautiful.
steal that, okay?
I like that. I like
Absolutely.
that. That's a good way to end this our Parsha talk, in a world that is quite shattered and quite as we say, in need of all the healing and repair that is possible, certainly in the world, and of course specifically in Klal Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, again thinking about all the challenges and our hostages and our soldiers and everyone who is experiencing these difficult days. We hope that these minutes together have been a source of wisdom and comfort and joy even. And we thank you for watching and thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We appreciate your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you again on another edition of Parsha Talk. We'll see you and have a beautiful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.